My name is James Robert Halladay. My title at the time I retired was Senior Fellow at Lord Corporation. I have always been interested in science. My father was a physics professor, so science has always been part of my interest. I was originally more interested in geology and paleontology, but when I went to college in the early 1970s, we were in the middle of a recession and money for those type of things was drying up, so I went into physics and chemistry. When I got out of college in 1976, nobody was really interested in hiring physicists. They said that's too theoretical. Everyone was looking for engineers. I sent out a number of resumes and got hired as a management trainee by Parker Seal, the division of Parker Hannifin, which it's interesting because it has gone the whole way around. They ended up buying Lord Corporation. But that's where I started because they decided it was easier to take a technical person and train them in management than a management person and train them in technology. And somewhere in that process, the technical director, who I didn't know, became impressed with me, called me into his office and said, "Jim, I'd like you to get out of this management training program and come into the lab here and I'll teach you rubber chemistry." And I said, "Presley, I'm going to come out of this program and go into middle-level management." And he said, "Jim, you learn rubber chemistry, you can go anywhere in the rubber industry." He said, "I can hire a guy that's a manager in a shoe store and bring him in here and call him a manager. It's just a title." So I went home and thought about it and decided I really liked the idea of technology better than management. So I went back in and got out of the management training program and he taught me rubber chemistry. The next headhunter that called in, I said, "I'll listen." I went up to Masco Corporation, who owned Delta Faucet and Peerless Faucet, and a bunch of oil tool companies. The vice president of technology at Masco Corporation was a fishing buddy with Don Alstad, who was the president at Lord Corporation. Masco didn't make their own rubber. I was the glorified consultant. We got together and decided the rubber parts that Masco needed wasn't a fit for Lord Corporation. On the other hand, the guy said, "But we've got an opening for something like this," and I said, "Tell me about it." I came and interviewed and took the job. And that was in 1981. So that's how I ended up at Lord. My contributions to Lord were pretty significant financially for them. When I joined Lord, most of the business was military. And they saw the handwriting, the managers there saw the handwriting on the wall and recognized that military wasn't going to go forever and that they needed to branch out into commercial aviation. So they started working with Boeing. At that point, the Boeing 737 engine mounts were made of a compressed metal mesh. And Lord worked to develop a similar material. But in the end, the metal mesh our engineers developed performed really no better than the competition's, which means all you're going to do is be a second source and get a token amount. And I was a young kid on the block. I said, "Why not make it in rubber?" They said, "Oh, rubber can't stand the heat of the engine." I said, "Silicone rubber can." They said, "Oh, silicone rubber's too soft and gushy, it can't hold the weight of the engine." I said, well, how stiff do you need it? How hard do you need it? And he said, oh, you can't make it hard enough. So I went back to the lab and bootlegged a project to make a very hard silicone, and in fact, made a material which was bowling ball hard. So I took it in and said, what about this? And he said, oh, well, since it was already made, they went ahead and tried it. And they came back and said, can you make it any softer? Like, you guys are the ones that said you can't make it hard enough. But anyway, so it got tested out, and that was on the Boeing 737-200. At that point in time, Lord's aerospace business was $45 million a year. The first order from Boeing was for $5 million. So after that, of course, nobody in management wanted to remember that they told me it can't be done and don't work on it, because they were all heroes and taking the credit for it. Another major breakthrough that I had was when we were working on the V-22 Osprey, the tilt rotor aircraft, military aircraft. One of the parts, the link for the propeller, for the blades, we were getting 60 to 80 hour flight life out of it. The bogey was 750 hours on the engineering prototype parts. They wanted 1,500 hours on the final part. We heard rumors that our competition had a 100-hour part. Either way, it was way too little. And Bell and Boeing, it was a Bell-Boeing consortium, said, you got one more shot. And then we're pulling the plug on it. This whole aircraft is not feasible. So they set up 2 design camps of engineers to come up with what this last product design was going to look like. And I got called in to just sit in and listen while these 2 camps each proposed their choice for the last one. And they said, well, what do you suggest? And I said, change the rubber. He said, we've spent years developing all these rubber formulations. I said, well, I looked at those formulations before I came in here, and there are things I would do differently. Well, how can you prove it'll work? I can't, but you've already proved you're going to fail. Your back's against the wall. It's time for the Hail Mary pass. What do you have to lose? Okay, so I made the formulation changes and we built the parts, and at 750 hours, well, at 350 hours, Bell and Boeing both sent in witnesses to observe the test. And at 750 hours, there was no sign of any damage. They turned it off. I said, why didn't you run it on out? That's too expensive. Doesn't matter, the program's a go. Well, without any more changes, it made the 1,500 hours that we needed for the final part. So Bell and Boeing didn't end up canning the project. The V-22 Osprey is a viable aircraft today. I would describe myself as a multidisciplinary person. I never let the partitions determine what I could do. I mean, with physics, with a physics degree, of course, I had the background that pretty much all of engineering is based on. You know, engineering is just really applied physics, mechanics, electricity and magnetism, optics, nuclear, whatever. But I never let the partitions silo me into only one area. So I could listen to what the design engineers needed. They couldn't understand the chemistry, but I could understand what they did. Now I wouldn't design a part, but I understood the principles that they were using and applying, and I could go figure out what they needed even if they didn't know enough to ask for it. So, of my patents, I have patents that include design characteristics, rubber formulations, adhesives for bonding rubber to metal. How do we make an adhesive to bond this rubber to this metal? I have a book that I wrote that's been published by De Gruyter on rubber to metal bonding. So I like to work outside the box and across the partitions rather than being siloed into just one primary area of expertise. I have 19 US patents. Obviously the patents contribute to the field because the whole idea of a patent is if you tell us how to do it such that when the patent expires, anybody can do it. The government gives you 20 years exclusivity on it, but that's in return for you spreading the knowledge so that it can be done by other people when the patent expires. I enjoy cooking, creating new recipes. It's much like the rubber, where I look at it and say, I've not seen a recipe that I couldn't improve on or make better. Martial arts. I'm a 8th degree black belt, but been 50 years in Shaolin Kung Fu, as you see from all the weapons around. And reading. I think the experience that has taught me the most was going back to the technical director at Parker Seal telling me, Jim, you learn rubber chemistry and you can go anywhere in the rubber industry. And he was right. There are so few rubber chemists because it's not something that's taught in college. You have to learn it pretty much on the job. Nobody teaches rubber chemistry or rubber technology. So you learn it on the job, but he was right. There are so few rubber chemists out there that they become a very desirable commodity. And I've never regretted that decision to get out of the management training program and into the lab and learn rubber science and technology and formulating, all that. But at this point in time, I have nearly 40-year career there. I probably have rubber formulations I developed on pretty much every aircraft in the free world. We could not make vibration isolation devices for Russia or China, but within the free world, pretty much anybody who made aircraft, not just fixed wing, but also rotary wing, the helicopters. There are formulations I developed on probably every one of them. Doesn't matter whether it's Bell or Boeing or Airbus, or they're on all of them.